Okay, I want to do a little bit of intro. Cindy did say my wife and I farm together. We run cattle and sheep on the Bellarine Peninsula and have for 30 odd years. Fiona runs the farm on a day-to-day basis. She's a fabulous stocky. My job is to grow the grass, stand the fences up and keep the water there and do the jobs as I'm told. And 33 years later we're still married, so the job seems to be going all right. But the reason I wanted to put that up is that we've farmed through 2 droughts. Okay, and if you've ever farmed through a drought, you'll know it leaves a lasting impression. And it leaves a lasting impression on the way you consider your decisions and what you do going forward. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. I also do a bit of work with the Victoria Drought Hub in the southwest node, so working with a group called Southern Farming Systems. And I'll just show you, because the job is about you've got to get 20 tools or decision processes, okay? I'm going to show you a few up front, so at least you'll have 2 by the time you're finished with my talk. And these are some of the things that we're doing in Victoria that I just wanted to share with you, because I reckon with this idea of co-design, there's some real opportunity in that to potentially use some of these things on the basis of sharing. So what I'm going to cover, first one I want to just touch on is relevance, because I reckon quite often we can get caught up in wanting to do stuff, but the audience isn't there. Okay, and if the audience isn't there and you're trying to push it, you're pushing it uphill, so to speak. The second one is I just want to reckon my nearly 40 years experience now in extension is that you need to have some understanding in your head of how things get adopted. Now, I don't mind which model you use, but I think having a model of this is how things get adopted is pretty useful, and I'll show you one that I like. But the main thing I'm going to talk about is actually around decision making. Because despite all the stuff that we can put out there, unless a farmer makes a decision and implements that, then you don't get anywhere. And it was my early frustration when I went private consulting 30 odd years ago, of how you could put what I thought was a really good idea out there and it didn't get adopted. And in particular, some things that I reckon we're pretty, poor is probably not the right word, but we don't give enough consideration to. First one is around rules of thumb. Okay, and I want to challenge you and give you some tips and tools on how you might challenge a farmer's rules of thumb. Okay, second one is around risk. Okay, risk is the most important thing that will influence a decision on a farm, and we do risk incredibly poorly and talk about it incredibly poorly. And then the third one is a little bit around complex decisions. Now in the title it's got stuff around temperament. I'm going to do a fair bit of that temperament in the breakout session I do, but I will link it back to what I'm going to show you here. Okay, let's start with the relevance bit, or the timing as I've called it. And I've said there's only one rule in extension: start where people are at. Now that's a different way of saying in this co-design, go and ask people to start with. What was it? Open the purse before you open the book. I got into the last bit of when John was talking. What was it? Open the kid. Okay. Different words, same sort of thing. You've got to start where people are at. And too often I've observed that we think this is what needs to be done now, and that's where we start from. Okay? So this, and it's my number one rule and my only rule in extension. And when I think about that and give you a framework, now there's a little brochure here about living with drought, which is on the back table. And if you look at the cycle there, the cycle says you're farming, so you're either preparing for drought, you're in drought, or you're recovering from drought. Well, I tell you what, I wouldn't get out of bed if that's what farming was about. Okay? I've got a different model in my head, okay, based on experience, and it looks something like this. Now, you'll have to excuse, because I'm not very good at all this techo stuff of drawing things, but I reckon there are 4 phases, and I've found this really useful in my engagement with farmers. We have good times in farming. We have lots of really good times, and they're incredibly pleasurable. That's why we farm. And we've got to celebrate those and do those sort of things. But from a climate cycle, quite often we will go to a stage where we hit an uncertain period. And I reckon if you cast your mind back 12 months, we went through an uncertain period. La Nina went to possible El Nino, then went to El Nino. Everybody panicked and started selling stock. Market crashed, 70% reduction in prices on a lot of stuff we were selling. But we didn't go into drought. Okay, we had a relieving event and we ended up back in good times again for most people. We do that cycle far more than we do go into drought. We've farmed 35 years, Fiona and I, together, we've only been drought twice, but we've been through the uncertain period about 10 times. Okay? The decisions you make in the uncertain period are really, really important, and I think we need to make sure we focus in on that as an area. Sometimes, though, those uncertain periods continue on, and it gets drier and drier, and we do end up in drought. Okay? And then when you go through that cycle, then we have this recovery period. But I think for most of us, we would spend most of our time in that circle, that way, going around in that circle, than in the drought bit. This period up here is super important because that's where you build your resilience. You plan and you build and you install your resilience in that cycle there, so when we get into this point here, then you've really got an opportunity to come out of it in a stronger way. When I talked about relevance of timing, does anybody get the Kindinan stuff, farming ahead stuff? Okay, we subscribe to that at home. It's a great little one. Making silage and hay came out. You know, fantastic. Super relevant for this sort of stuff. Guess when it came out? End of January. How many people make hay end of January? Okay. But the important part about this is that this will be lost by the time we get around the next hay cycle. Okay? So part of what we've got to think about is how do we get that timing right. Now I'm going to share something very quickly with you. This is from, we've started to use in a co-design process, you could say, from the Victoria Drought Hub. So what we've got here, we've just broken up into 4 seasons of the year, and we've got those 4 different bits of the climate cycle. So this is good times, and these are the other 4 parts. So we just broke it up into seasons. We sat down with a whole lot of broadacre grazing farmers and said, what do good farmers do at this stage of the cycle? If you're in good times in autumn, what are you doing to prepare yourself to make your farm more resilient? And we started using this, and we went through all 4 seasons and different phases, so good times, uncertain period and so on, drought period, recovering from drought. Now, fantastic co-design process, particularly for the people that are involved in the Drought Hub. Why? Because you've got an understanding of what good farmers do at certain times. So now we use this to try and map 6 months ahead and say, okay, if we're in uncertain period and we're going from summer into autumn, what are the sort of issues that good farmers are thinking and doing? And we're trying to prepare stuff before that so that we're relevant to the audience when those things happen. Fantastic co-design tool. So that's one of them. Okay. The second one I mentioned was this idea about having an adoption model or some framework or something in your head that you can peg back to when you're trying to do some of this design. This is the one that I use. I first encountered this in a program called Sustainable Grazing Systems. So this is in the 1990s. Okay. It's sort of been lost. We did publish this, but it's sort of been lost. But in my head, the easy thing to think about is there's 3 phases that you go through. A motivation phase, an exploration and trialling phase, and a farm practice stage. So first of all, you've got to get people in the space, into the headspace. And that co-design type stuff helps them get into that space. The second one, then you transfer that into, let's start to explore this, let's start to develop the knowledge, the skills, the confidence we need to make that happen. And then the third part of it is that, okay, we've got that, we know that sort of works, how do you translate that across the whole farm? Because I can tell you going from there to there is a lot more effort and a lot more commitment in there than there is to turn up to an event and sit and listen to someone talk. Okay? But knowing those different phases are important for a few reasons. First one is that at each of these 3 points, people are making a decision. And I reckon the Achilles heel in agriculture is that we haven't taught people how to make good decisions. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a tick. Okay? The second thing that comes out of that is that whenever you start a program, I've learnt that people will be, no matter what the topic is, people will be at different stages of that cycle. And how often do we think we'll write a program, the first thing we do, we'll run an awareness campaign, then we'll do this, then we'll do this. Sorry, they're all around that. Okay, and we've got to think laterally enough. Well, how do we engage people that are here, as well as engaging people that are here to suit those whole lot? Following on from that, the speed at which they'll move around that is going to be different. So for some people, they will move very rapidly through that, and you've got to keep up with them. Other people, there's a lot of investment just to move small step forward to actually progress somewhere. And we've got to design programs that allow us to do both of those. And as I said, supporting the decision making is super important as well. So I don't mind what adoption model you've got, but please get one. Please find one you like. Please find one that the words mean something to you and you can peg yourself against it. That's just one that came out of the 1990s from the Sustainable Grazing Systems program. And if anybody heard of the Grain and Graze program that ran for about 15 years, that was the model that underpinned the investment in grain and graze over 15 years. All right, I want to move on to the third bit of this, which is around the decision making and the resilience side of it. I'm going to introduce a few things, but first of all, a quote when I started consulting. Experienced dairy consultant down in Gippsland said the biggest difference between the top 20% of farmers and the rest is their ability to make good decisions earlier and more often. It's not because they get more rain, it's not because they've got better soil, it's not because they've got better equity, changes over time because they're making better good decisions, but it's the way they make their decisions. And I was fascinated, I was doing a road trip for GRDC, and this was over in WA, and a lady at the back just stood up and said, "You assume we know how to make good decisions. I've never been taught." And so I've got a question for you. When were you taught to make a good decision the same way you were taught to read, write and do maths? Can you remember how you learnt to read? Anybody got kids? Taught kids how to read? What do? Start with picture books, little small words, and over time you build up. Okay, same with maths. Learn to times table, learn how to add and divide, and then you get more complex as you go on. Can you think of the same thing in decision making? 15 years of decision making learning? Sorry? Oh, yes, you learn, and I'll touch on that in a tick, yeah, really good point, yeah. But in this case here, if you really think about it, the only people that put up their hand confidently when I put this slide up, when I'm giving this talk, is people from the military. Because they go in the military and guess what? They are taught how to make a decision under pressure. Yes. Yeah, got a son who's in accident and emergency at the moment, and the stuff when he comes back is what he's telling. But if you think up to that stage, we were all making decisions all the time, have we been taught it? No, we haven't. And we assume that if we put stuff out there and give farmers experiences, they'll know how to process that and make a good decision as a result. I just reckon it is such a hole in where we are in agriculture. I want to introduce this idea about decision making through what I call the head, heart and gut of making a decision. Okay, and I wish I'd been taught this when I went through university. I wasn't. And if this is all you remember from that bloke from Victoria that stood up, I'd be really happy, okay, when you leave. What do you reckon the head relates to? Sorry? Logic, okay, logic. Other words? Pops in your head when I say the head of decision making. Information, facts, beautiful. Okay. The logical or orderly approach to analysing or solving a problem. And aren't we good at agriculture at doing this? Do it all the time. Nothing wrong with that. It's how we've advanced agriculture. That's why we do statistics and we do replicated trials and we do all these sort of investigations and stuff. Really important. But that by itself doesn't drive a farmer's decision. And when I first started in consulting, I thought, you know, they're paying me. I need to have the answer. So I would write all these reports to them with all this analysis and all this information and come back 6 months later, nothing been adopted. And I used to do my head in until the penny dropped. It's two other forces at work, two other influences. What do you reckon the heart relates to? What you want to happen, yeah. Some values, beautiful. Where'd that come from? Right at the back, beautiful. So I'm looking at the lights, the glass, so I can't see. Anything else? Values, beautiful. What else might it be? Where your passion is, okay? Preferences, stuff like that. Who was it? Jess, I think I was talking to at lunchtime. We were talking about new technology on water monitoring. And I did some stuff up in Queensland, and it was all about tech and water monitoring. Sitting next to this bloke, and this is how much time and money it was going to save, and the calculations around new tech and going to save you all this money and all this sort of stuff. I'm sitting next to this bloke and I go, "Oh, are you going to buy one of these?" Up in Queensland. He goes, "Nah." So that's interesting, why not? Anyway, we got talking, and it happened that he was a mad birdo. He's a farmer, but a mad birdo. And his greatest pleasure in farming was to do the ball run once a week, because he would see the landscape, he would see the birds. He'd go by himself, take his dog, go by himself. It was his quiet time. It's the number one reason why he farmed. Okay? Guess what? We're going to save you all this money. You don't have to go out and do that anymore. Wonder why he wasn't going to adopt it. Okay? So understanding the heart bit of it. So the emotional stuff, values, beliefs, preferences. I remember doing stuff in New South Wales with a farming family that had livestock many years ago, went cropping, bringing livestock back into the system because the sun was coming back on the farm. Sat down, did all the numbers, all made sense, diversified risk, managed risk, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be profitable. My son's sitting around the table as we're discussing it. I just looked at him and I thought, you don't seem too happy about it. And I said, what do you think about this as an idea? He just looked at me and goes, I hate sheep. Oh, hate sheep, do you? Why do you hate sheep? Well, when I came back from boarding school, Mum and Dad used to have 10,000 wethers, and my job when I came home was to drench them. Okay? And then I'd go back to boarding school. And the mother and father had the son earmarked to do the sheep work, to bring the sheep back in. Is that going to work? It's going to be an absolute disaster. Okay? But made sense on paper. Made sense on paper. Okay? So these values, preferences and beliefs are really important. Our fears as well. What do you worry about? What are you concerned about? Is part of this. And the last one is the gut, which is the intuitive stuff. Heard of an expression called gut feel? Ever made a decision where you feel uneasy in your stomach? Can't put your finger on it, but you go, there's something not right with that. Okay? It's because you've got more nerve endings in your gut than you have in your brain. Okay? So it's a real thing that happens. The makers tell you it's a real thing that happens. Okay? Now, what's important about the gut is that so many farmers, their primary driver for their decision making is their gut. Okay? And there's a few things to unpack in the gut. First of all, it's the way we view and frame risk. It's not by analysis, it's not by the head stuff. It's by what I feel, is that risky or not? And my decision will be made on that basis. Okay? It's also shaped by our experience. If we have a bad experience, I'm not going to do that again. Okay? Now, if you think about those couple of words, their experience and risk, and think about how well in the stuff we're trying to communicate with people and engage with people, do we do that? I reckon we do it really poorly. Really poorly. Okay. Also, what influences this is your temperament. Now, I'm going to do a whole session on the temperament in the giraffe room or somewhere, one of the rooms up there, where I go into this in more detail, how you can pick people's temperament and understand how much are they for head, heart and gut drivers just by indicators and words they say. So I'll leave that for the moment. Okay? But everybody sort of follow this idea of head, heart and gut? All right, I'm going to drill into a couple more of these. Not the head bit. I'm going to park the head bit because I reckon we're all pretty good at doing stuff for the head. Okay? But it's the heart and the gut stuff I want to explore a little bit more with the bit of time I've got left. Okay, how do you work this out? Now, I've heard a lot of people say, just ask people, what are their goals? Let's start a conversation with, what are your goals? I don't know if you've ever spoken to a farmer and the first thing you say to them, yeah, but what are your goals? And they go, what? It's not what you're out here for. So there are other ways you can do it. The first one is this, you can observe. If I ever go onto a farm and the first thing I do is get taken to the wool shed and look at this, I know what they're passionate about. Straight away. As soon as you get on the farm, try and tap in and find what their passion is. And you can ask questions that don't sound weird, What's the best bit about farming? When I said that bloke about the ball run, and he was a birdo, it was simply a couple of questions. And all of a sudden, it all became clearer. That's what he's passionate about. That's what he likes. Technology has to fit in with that to make it work. Okay? And so things like that. So think about, with the heart, what are some of the expressions you might be able to use to start to drill down with that? Just a few words, a few sentences that make sense to you. I've got there that don't sound weird, because I hear some people using someone else's expressions and it's not right out of your mouth, as far as that goes. And, this has been alluded to a couple of times. This is my way of describing it. You show an interest in me and I'll show an interest in you. If you ever want to get a connection, show an interest in someone else first. then they'll be interested in you. Okay? We don't do that. We want to shove our stuff out there because that's our job, isn't it? Pause, spend a little bit of time, find out what they like, find out what they're interested in, find out what they're passionate about, find out how the family structure works. All of that sort of stuff is really useful for then framing your message and what you need to do. Okay, I want to move on to the gut because there's a few aspects to this. Now, the gut side, as I said, I reckon is the most important, and I should have learnt this much earlier. So it's the intuitive part around your decision making. Okay? Things that are important in this space. One is rules of thumb. Anybody heard of a rule of thumb? What's a rule of thumb? You live by it, yeah? Sorry? A rough guide. Okay, beautiful. We all have them. Sometimes we don't admit to having them. We did a great exercise. I had a student who was doing her honours year in the Grain and Graze program, and we started talking about rules of thumb and the influence of them. So Zoe was running these workshops and put all the farmers on one group saying, what are the rules of thumb that you use in farming? And they were all writing down a bit of butcher's paper. And then we put all the agros on the other ones, and all the agros go, no, we don't use rules of thumb, we just use all the science and all this sort of stuff. And then we asked the farmers, where'd you get those rules of thumb from? They go, oh, the agros. They tell us all the time. Even though the agros are saying, oh, we don't do that, okay? Rules of thumb are incredibly powerful. Because if you've got a rule of thumb in your head, okay, then when someone suggests something, the first thing you do is filter it against your rule of thumb. Oh, you're saying that? No, I tried that. That doesn't work. No, my rule is this. Okay? And you could straight away get that conflict, all the shutters go up. So there's a really good skill if you can unpack a rule of thumb. Okay? And there's a short video I won't show because I haven't got time. But Zoe put a really good one of unpacking rules of thumb. And all it is a series of 4 questions, but 4 very open-ended questions. First one being, when did you first hear that? And as soon as you ask that question, people go, oh, I don't know. Oh, it's just been around forever. Oh, okay. And how's it served you? Any years when it stuck you up? Oh, yeah, a few times. And so you're having this conversation, and before you know it, you've started to break down that barrier that the rule of thumb is what I live by. And maybe there's something else I could vary in it. So there's some really good stuff there that Zoe's got in that video. The second one is experience, as I mentioned before, and particularly this thing called recency bias. Had a bad experience last year, you're not going to do it again. Okay? And sometimes we've got to question that. Okay, yeah, you had a bad experience. Has it worked out well for you in previous times? Oh, yeah, a few times it did. So it was just this last time when it was really bad? Yeah, it was real. So the odds are maybe 1 in 10 it's going to be bad. 9 times out of 10 it's going to be good? Yeah, probably. Just those sort of conversations all of a sudden breaks down this idea that, no, I'm not going to do it anymore because it's bad. Its recency bias can be pretty strong in the whole thing. And the last one I want to touch on in the risk side, of the gut side of it, is around risk. Okay? And my extension 101, apart from starting where people are at, is ask, don't assume. Now, it's been mentioned a few times in different ways by different people, but this is a really important one when you're in that gut side of it. And I think I've only got 8 minutes. I think I've got enough time to tell you a quick story. I was doing I'm agronomist by background, so pasture soils, livestock is my background. And I was doing a thing in a wool shed up at Horsham, and it was all around pastures because this bloke knows something about pastures, and sitting around the wool shed, and one bloke said, what do you do about cape weed? Cape weed being a problem weed that we have in a lot of our pastures. And straight away I said, spray grazing is a great technique. And I just watched everybody sitting there cross their arms. And as soon as that left my mouth, I thought, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have said that. And I said, has anybody had any experience with cape weed, and spray grazing for control? The finger goes up like that. That real reluctant sort of not going to engage, just going to do that. And so I said, just tell us your stories. So I just spent 5 minutes just getting everybody to tell their stories. Okay, and ask a few questions on the way through. I turned around and I started writing some things up on the whiteboard. And I said, look, this is my understanding of the fundamentals of how spray grazing works. Got to about the third point, and I heard one bloke said, that's why it bloody well didn't work. Went a little bit further. Someone said, oh, is that why it says stock with 3 times the stocking rate on the label? And so we got through, and there were about 4 or 5 misunderstandings about a practice that had stopped everybody from doing it. So anyway, we unpicked all of that. Now, I should have started with, what's your experience with? And it doesn't matter if you know the answer, or you think you know the answer, or you think they will know the answer, or you think they're on board with what you're talking about, still ask it. What's your experience with such and such? Oh, I've used it a few times, fabulous. All right, I know now where to position our conversation. Tried it a few times, hopeless. Cost me a lot of money, never doing it again. I know where to start. Okay, don't assume you know where they're at. But a simple question of what's your experience with is not weird. It's part of a normal conversation I'd have. Okay. But it brings out a hell of a lot. Okay, my golden question is that. Just try using it. It'll change your life. It really will. Because all of a sudden, you'll be keyed into something you didn't think about. That's what's driving them. Just as a closing to that little story, was that about 12 months later, they wanted to come down to our place to have a look around. You know, everybody loves a sticky beak, so they stuck in a minibus, and I drove them out. I'd done some of this spray grazing, and I'd left the corners. I hadn't cut the corners out, so they're little crescents where the boom had gone around every time. So I drove them out in the paddock there. We stopped, got out of the minibus, and I said, oh, look, this is a paddock that I've spray grazed. And they're all looking at me going, why are we here? And I said, I just wanted to show you spray grazing and how effective it is. They go, we know that. You know, so everybody on the bus was convinced it worked. Why? Because I told them a way of having a play with it, trial it, get down that stage before you adopt it across the farm. They'd all got it. And they just looked at me going, oh, we don't want to be here. We want to see what you're doing over there. You know, so I'd gone from a shed full of people that thought it was a stupid technique, a stupid practice, to everybody having tried it, convinced, and now that's what you do. That was in 12 months. So I reckon you can shift anybody. You've just got to have the right way of doing it. So I wrap all that up in respect. Now, in my mind, if I really respect someone, I'm interested in them, I'm curious, I ask questions, I don't try and shove something down their throat. But when the time's right to add something in that might help, I add it in. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? I've only got 14 minutes. No? All right, keep whizzing. Touch on that rule of thumb. They're the mental shortcuts. Speed up decision making. That's why we have them, so that we don't spend a lot of time processing. That's why we do it. Starting point for all your decisions, and they're used unconsciously. So believe it or not, if you ever want to have a bit of fun, start unpacking or start asking what are some of the rules of thumb that are influencing this decision. You will get a great list. You'll get a great list. And then if you can unpack them with those 4 questions, works really well. And rules of thumb can be learnt. Okay, so you can learn good habits, you can learn good things that drive your decisions, you can learn bad ones. And sometimes if you think it's actually that rule of thumb that's stopping us moving forward, then being able to unpick them is a pretty handy skill. And quite often when you've got limited information, it's when you'd use them. So the short video, it's only 5-6 minutes that Zoe put together. It's really fantastic of just how you unpack those rules of thumb, and I can give the organisers a link to that. But if you just Google Southern Farming Systems rules of thumb, that'll pop up on YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel. Right, quickly I want to talk about risk. How many people are economists in the room? Yeah, couple? Okay. How many grow barley? Anybody grow barley? No? Wool? Yeah, couple? Okay. Everybody will be able to do this. On the left-hand side, I've got a gross margin, which is 100 hectares of barley. We're growing at 3 tonne a hectare at $250 a tonne, so you get 75 grand. Costs are $400 a hectare or $40,000. Net income is $35,000 or $350 a hectare. Everybody follow that? Simple gross margin. On the right-hand side, same 100 hectares, cut 30 kilos of clean wool at $12.40 a kilo, 10 grand in sheep sales, so our gross income is lower, 47, not 75. Our costs are $220. Our net income's $252. Which one's a higher gross margin? Not a trick question. The barley, okay. Which one's got greater risk? How do you tell that? How do you tell that? No, you don't grow it. How do you know that? In what way?
Well, you've got to ensure that all your inputs are going to be
Okay. So weather inputs can affect the yield that you might get. Yep. Possibly that you get nothing for your barley, but as long as your sheep aren't eating rocks, they'll usually grow you some wool. Okay, anything else? Tells you one's riskier than the other. Higher costs. Okay, the cost structures are different. Okay, anything else?
It's an all or, it can be an all or nothing investment where you're likely to get some wool.
Okay, likely to get some wool, and you've got two income streams. You've got wool and you've got sheep sales, where in your barley you've only got one. Okay, so we know something about risk, even though none of you grow it, none of you farm it, and none of you are probably experts in growing barley or growing wool. How do you know that? You just do, don't you? You just do. And that's where most of our risk resides. Out of the head, heart, gut, it's in the gut. You would have heard things, you would have heard stories, you would have seen, if you've got dual income, that diversifies risk compared to if you've only got a single income and so on. So you know stuff about risk, not from the numbers, it's from your gut feel. It's from what you interpret and understand that to be. So a little bit more about risk, derived from the Italian word risicare, actually means to dare. Okay, farming is the riskiest business in town. Australian Farm Institute did a study and they found that of the different sectors of the Australian economy, by gross income, the most volatile sector in the Australian economy was agriculture. If you compare it against mining, retail, a whole lot of other sectors, housing, all that sort of stuff, the greatest volatility is in farming. And then they looked at Australian agriculture compared to the rest of the world, and guess who came out on top? Australia. Okay. We beat Uruguay, which was good. Okay, and so when you put that together, Australian farmers play the riskiest game in town. Okay, so sometimes when they're conservative because they actually appreciate how much risk is involved in this. But we've got to trade off upside risk and downside risk. Okay? Risk lies in the extreme, not the averages. If you've got average prices and average yields every year, it'd be really easy. Okay? How often do we put information out to farmers that is the average? We talk about average rainfall. Useless. Absolutely useless. We talk about average prices. Absolutely useless in managing risk, which is a huge influence on their decision making. Okay? If we want to think about this, we actually want to think about the extremes that we're dealing with. Importantly though, there's no right or wrong position on this. It's what you're prepared to live with. So I could have two people with the same amount of exposure or risk. Someone says, yep, I'll have a punt at that, someone else wouldn't. And your decisions around risk, which is where this is all leading to, is really dependent on the odds. So we're going to do a quick quiz. Okay. You're all farmers, even though you're not, okay, but now you are. You're all farmers for a minute, running a particular ag operation. Your farm operating profit, so that's your gross income less your variable and your overhead costs, was $200,000. Next year you're going to make a choice, or you're going to make a decision. And you're going to keep the same operation and get a certain farm operating profit of $200,000, or you could change where you've got a 50% chance of getting $400,000 and a 50% chance of getting nothing. Okay, you only got two choices. We're not going to think too deeply about this. Okay, two choices: same operation, 200,000, 50% chance of 400, 50% chance of 0. Okay, A or B. Which one do you choose? Who chooses A? Okay, 70%. Who chooses B? Okay, aren't they the same in the long run? So why would people choose differently? Okay, cash flow could be one. Okay, your circumstance and the way you view it. I do some lecturing at Marcus Oldham. When I do this with the students, about 80% of them go for B. Okay, when I said to some of them, what if you got a 0? They said, oh, that's right, Mum and Dad bailed me out. As one fella said to me, oh, I got 30 harvests to catch up. I said, you may not. Why? Because their parents have been around the block a few times, and their experience puts them in a different position of where they look at risk than what we do. But the bottom line is that there are odds, and at certain odds you'll say, yes, I'll go for that, or no, I won't. So odds and decisions are pretty important. So those that chose B, you've got to sit on your hands now. For the majority that chose A, I'm going to change the odds a bit. What if there was a 60% chance of 400,000 and a 40% chance of zero? Who would change now? Okay, 2, 3, about half a dozen. What about a 70% chance of 400,000 and a 30% chance of zero? Who's going up? Okay, the majority. And anybody that's really rusted on, I'll give you 90%. Okay, so some people want really good odds to get it. Okay, what's the point of the exercise? As the odds change, your decision changes. And if you think of the stuff we put out there at the moment, how often do they have odds or probabilities or chances around it? We don't. Except it's the biggest thing that will drive the way the farmer views those decisions to adopt or not. Okay? We have a real gap, okay, in getting some of this stuff right. Okay. So remember, no advice is risk-free. We'd like to think it is, and we might be convinced about it, but from a farm point of view, it may not be. Okay, they are calculating the risk in anything you would like them to adopt or change. And the second thing is it's very easy to spend someone else's money. Okay, and I've learnt that in ag. So just think about the things you're asking them to do, the change, the thing you're wanting them to adopt. Think about not only what's capital up front, but also what could go wrong with that. What are they actually gambling with? Because that's what it is. Okay? And unless we're willing to have that conversation, then we're really going to struggle, I think, to get very far in making some significant changes in the way we build our farm systems and do them. How am I going, Cindy? Do I need to stop now? Or?
4 more minutes.
Oh, have I? Beautiful. Oh, that is real. Okay, I've got 5 here. That's right. I'm going to pinch another one. All right, I'm going to finish off on this slide, which is around what I see in complex decision making. Because a lot of the stuff we're asking people to do in building farm resilience are complex decisions. And what do I mean by a complex decision? I think about them in terms of simple, complicated and complex decisions. Simple decisions, you're not farmers, but if you're a farmer and you had to drench your sheep, how would you know how much to drench them? You weigh them, you read the label. The label says for so many kilograms you've got to do that. Simple decision to make. Okay? Most of the big things we've got to do and most of our drought stuff that we're trying to get people to prepare for are complex decisions, which means they don't have a recipe, they don't have a right answer, they have principles that drive them, and people will stick them together in different ways. I've got a number of farms that will turn a similar profit and do it in a totally different way, but they still turn a profit at the end of the day. Okay? It's the principles that drive what they do. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of these things here. The first one, complex decisions have a number of critical factors. Okay, once you get more than 3 critical things that you're trying to weigh up in your head goes boom. Okay, and you can't do it. So my golden rule for anybody, if you're going to make a complex decision, is write it down. As soon as you pause and have to write it, your brain slows down. Anybody heard of a bloke called Daniel Kahneman? He wrote a book called Thinking Slow and Fast, or Fast and Slow, or something else. It's not a holiday read, but it's a really good book for understanding the difference between we process, and his argument, if I distill it down, the argument is that we make decisions far too quickly. And if we just stopped and paused for a bit, we would end up making better decisions. You having to write down those critical factors, so in any co-design, any stuff you're doing, if you just get people to pause and write down, which has been an essence of what's been coming through in the co-design stuff, it'll make a difference. Whenever Fiona and I have got to make a big decision on the farm, we sit down together and write it down. And if you've got 2 people involved, it's better than 1, because then one person will ask you, why have you got that one down? Why are we including this? Maybe we should consider this as well. It slows down your thinking. You'll make much better decisions as a result. We also know that each of those critical factors has tipping points. Okay, so if rainfall was one of your critical factors of the decision, do I sell stock or not, as an example, I bet you'd think differently if we had above average rainfall forecast, average or below average. There are points when you think differently. And the more we can start to pull those points out, the more we will end up making better decisions. Because we know, this is like this and this is like this, then we need to make this decision. Okay, not all factors are of equal importance, so of this list here, we also need to think about which ones are more important to others, and they will be different for different people. Because the hard decisions we've got to make, and as I said, particularly when you go into that uncertain period, this is what I find most of my clients struggle with the most. It's the uncertain period. Once you're in drought, if you're well set up for drought and you've made those decisions, it's just Groundhog Day. Okay, you just hang in there and just do what you got to do. It's getting there that's the bit that fries people. Okay, and it's because you've got some things on the pros sides and some things on the con side. And the last one is we've got to make a decision and then roll the dice and hope that it works out well. So I talk about this idea of good decisions and right decisions. Right decisions you only know in hindsight, good decisions you've got to make. So trying to pull all this together, I use this fella, don't know if anybody knows him, bloke by the name of Barry Mudge, great farmer, incredibly intelligent. He farms just on the goiter line, and if anybody knows what the goiter line is, it's that line, magical line between where supposedly you can farm and when you move into rangelands. They're profitable 6th generation farmers there, can grow a profitable wheat crop on 110 mil of moisture. It's a really tough environment, very profitable because he's a really good decision maker. Anyway, he taught me this thing called a decision matrix, and I haven't got time to go through it all, but this is one that we've got at home. Fiona and I have got about half a dozen of these for the farm at home. This is one that we've got, do I sell this mob of animals or do I retain and feed them? Okay, typical question that you'll be asked when you start to go into that uncertain period. Got too many stock on, need to sell some. What have we got down the left here? We've got our critical factors that we've listed out together. Then we've got our tipping points. So our tipping point there, so one of them was the current versus future price, for example, and so one tipping point is if the price is high now and likely to be less in the future, I would think differently about that decision compared to if it was low now or likely to be higher in the future. If they're not worth anything now but might be worth something later on, I might hang on to them. But if it's the other way around, that is an incentive for me to sell more. But it's not just one factor. And you'll see the one down the bottom is emotional attachment. So it brings in the head, heart and gut of what you think is important, not just the facts, not just the numbers. Okay? And then we have this point here. And so every year we will go through, if we've got a mob of animals, and we'll go, do we sell these? And you go through and score them. And we do these on years when it's a no-brainer, we're not going to sell them. But just so we get into the habit of doing this, using these matrices, refining these each year so we're better off. So when you do get into that really tight, uncertain period, you can then go through and do that exercise. And there's a couple of examples here that there's an example there of just how we've scored it. Scored 20 out of 27, it was above 19, so we sold them. Okay, just based on, because some of them are on the pros side, some of them are on the con side of it. And on that basis, sorry I had to rush through all that, but I'll call it quits on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cam. Okay.